Welcome to another episode of Feed the Trolls. And if you didn't know, this whole show actually was formed around the idea that we would spend our weeks going through HLTV forums, Reddit, seeing what the big topic of conversation was, and then obviously breaking it down here. In the last few episodes, we've kind of just deviated and done whatever we wanted. But now we're going right back to our original roots, because today we've got Messioso joining us to break down the BESTIA situation involving visas, not making the major, Blast getting lots of hate online, absolute chaos in South America. And I need to start this entire show by pointing out that I was on a broadcast in Sweden running on Dallas time.
Disclaimer, okay, like,
working ridiculous hours. So all I saw were bits and pieces of HLTV forums and a couple of social media posts. Like every so often I'd see a tweet. That was as much context as I had. And I was jumping to huge conclusions. I was doing exactly what you do. And when I say you, I'm talking about all the trolls out there. And just completely making up my opinions based on no information. Coming into this show, I was going to research. And then I thought, no, I'm going to come in with as much information as I had from those social media posts, because I think it'll make it fun. So that is how we are going to start this whole show. I am going to be a typical HLTV forum user and come with my opinions. Let's get right back to the beginning. The first bit of this story that I saw was BESTIA tweeting out looking for help to get their visas.
By the way, it almost was like, SOS, please, at Richard Lewis, you must retweet this, please. Like that actually was. By the way, I retweeted one of those, because again, they just pull at your heartstrings and you're like, I've got time to look into this, but okay.
I'm from South Africa.
If you need to live or something. Yeah,
I'm from South Africa.
Give a retweet. It's all good.
I have a United Kingdom passport, so I'm fine. But if you have a South African passport, you can't get anywhere and you need visas. Right. So I get the struggle. Messioso knows he has to get JT visas before he got his European passport.
I mean, he had the whole thing. That's why it's actually perfect, this topic.
Yeah, the irony is now I have the only player who actually doesn't have a visa for the major.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I mean, that was the whole start of it, right? And I saw, I'm going to bring him up because this is going to be my thing now. He's going to come into every show I do. Fallen even tweeted trying to get like a Brazilian politician involved. It was a whole damn thing. And that was the start, right?
I love the idea that like we're also deluded in esports. We think if we like tag a politician on Twitter, they'll just like rush it. Whoa, what can I do here? Like, halt the whole country, start helping this guy in CS. Like, it's mad in it. We're so mad in esports.
Well, there, right, and that was the start. Messioso, am I right? That was the first piece of context we had to this whole visa conversation with this
pretty much, They like I'd heard rumors sort of behind the scenes that there was some teams that were struggling, and I knew BESTIA was one of them. Apparently, there was an Asian team as well that was like really, really struggling.
By the way, it's the reason why, if you saw in interviews, certain people, like I think Astralis and maybe, I can't remember if Gamer Legion did it, but I know there was a couple of teams that were sort of like, of course, if someone was to mistimate, they were all doing that thing where they were like opening the door.
Supposedly
like,
there was also a Russian team that may have had some issues as well, but I never heard anything concrete about that. So I think that's why Astralis was staying a bit alert as well. But like, I definitely know BESTIA, and I know for a fact there was definitely one Asian team that was like up until the last week before the deadline, I'm going to put the deadline in quotation marks. We can talk about that later.
Sure.
Exactly.
That's a whole topic in
itself.
itself.
There was at least one Asian team and BESTIA that were like really struggling with visas, like to the point where Blast were concerned, I'd say. Like everything else was like one player. And if it's one player, like for example, like FlyQuest had Regali, who didn't have a visa but had everything set up. It was approved. He just had to actually like have time to stop playing events to actually go and get the visa. But because their coach and sub cast had a visa, they had an eligible team, same as us. Like we had junior eligible, so we were never at threat of the deadline. So Halzek's visa timing didn't matter. Whereas like if you have multiple players, like 2 players, then you can't field a team of 5 players. Then that's when they were getting concerned. So yeah, there was only 2 teams that I know of that were like in that category.
And then straight after that, the next bit of information I had was suddenly BESTIA was tweeting out, and also remember, this is all in Spanish and Portuguese, and half the time I'm trying to use like Google Translate to figure out what people are saying. They're suddenly doing a video saying, we actually have our appointments now, but Blast has set this deadline, and the deadline is Friday, but we've only got the appointments on Monday, and we need everyone to tweet Blast to tell them to extend the deadline, to drop the deadline. And then suddenly you saw all these pro players tweeting some, I think it was a Spanish hashtag. I might have tweeted it out of support because at this point I was like, seems like a worthwhile thing to do. And that was the next step. But so my question to you, and here we go, let's open this can of worms. Messioso, when did this deadline from Blast actually pop up? Was there a deadline originally? Was it this last minute deadline?
The earliest I heard about the deadline was the Monday of the week, and then the deadline was on the Wednesday. So I heard on Monday morning that there was a deadline set for Wednesday, and that was all I knew. I didn't know what time it was. I didn't know when the deadline was set, but that was the earliest I heard. I know that teams had been asking about a deadline because they were sort of like, hey, if like let's say it's Legacy, because it was Legacy, like they were the team that was in line. They wanted to know, like, hey, do we fly home from Dallas? Do we stay after Dallas? Like, they didn't know, because obviously, like, if they leave and go back to Brazil and then have to come back to Austin like 2 days later, it would look a bit weird, and they don't want to risk going through immigration again, things like that. So they were sort of like, hey, when is the deadline? And Blast were like, we don't have one. And then all of a sudden there was a deadline, and it was for Wednesday. And the earliest I heard about that was on the Monday. It now transpires, supposedly, that deadline was set on the Friday, which Friday European evening is what? Middle of the day, Argentinian time. So they had like half a day plus 2 days before the deadline, because again, the deadline was set Central European time, 5 p.m. So like, again, like not even midday in Argentina. So they had like 2.5 days, business days, from the point they got the deadline, as far as I'm aware, until they had to have visas, which is a relatively short period of time.
Was that deadline set? Because this is the point that I'm not 100% sure of. Was the deadline set before or after they said they had their appointment?
Before.
Because they'd obviously tweeted that they didn't know if they were going to get the visas. Okay, so in that way, I mean, I suppose, Thorin, I'd argue that the TO looks at this and goes, okay, they don't even know if they're going to be able to get these visas. We need to put like a hard and fast rule in place now, because we've obviously got to accommodate the replacement team. And let's be fair, there was probably developer pressure, because we want to.
Oh, no doubt, yeah.
It was so last minute the last time when they got the major capsule out. We don't want to do that again. We want to optimize revenue, etc. We need to like hard and fast.
They actually released the capsule for Copenhagen with 9 pandas in it, and then had to switch them with Gamer Legion.
Yes.
So like, I'm pretty sure Valve did not appreciate that. I think they would rather avoid that. So I'm sure Valve were like, hey, yeah, we support you in setting a deadline that allows us to do this properly. So like, everyone's like, oh, but they gave in Copenhagen, they gave 9 pandas till 2 days before. I was like, yeah, that's fucking horrible. Like, that shouldn't be the benchmark. This is not a good thing. So I'm glad that they did set it further out. I think it's also worth noting that obviously Bestia weren't the only team that was relevant in this case. There was at least one other team that may or may not have had visas and probably got the same deadline, or maybe didn't get the same deadline. Maybe they got their visas slightly before. I don't know what their timeline was. But you also have to apply rules to all teams, not just one team. So if it had applied to multiple teams, then like, even if they say they have appointments, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a visa. Like, I know they had a lot of these assurances, and they'd gone to like a very high political level to help them out, but that doesn't mean that you're going to get a visa. So even if they had gotten an extension, I think they asked initially till the Monday following, which would have been like an additional 5 days or 3 business days to get the visas. Now, it turns out they ended up getting them the day after the deadline, which is very easy for them to retrospectively say, we could have extended the deadline 24 hours, but they were asking for 5 days. So it's a bit troublesome, really. Like, the whole timeline of events has been warped a lot by the media, let's say. Like, the public perception of like the timeline of events has been very muddy.
Straight lying, seemingly.
Straight up lying. Like, the biggest trouble I got into was because when Blast put out their initial statement, somebody with the capability to write community notes on Twitter had written a community note that was just blatantly false. Right. It was just 100% false. There was no.
And people don't know it's because the problem is that those are literally essentially a popularity contest. So if you get enough people like in a Discord who are motivated, as you can imagine in this case you would, you can actually get things that are like factually false put through as a community note, believe it or not.
Yeah. So I saw that. I have the ability to like vote and downvote whatever on community notes. So I saw it. I was like, this is just ridiculous. So I downvoted it. And eventually it did get removed. Like, enough people realized like this is ridiculous.
Right.
But yeah, I initially tweeted about it. I said like, this is like, just like, it's just false. And I had like loads of conversations with users, like I've not like anyone from Bestia, no one associated, just like general, like, I assume Argentinian Twitter users who were like, why are you doing this? I was like, well, it's false. Like, I'm not saying that Bestia are right or wrong, but the community note is false. And that's all I'm trying to correct. I'm just trying to correct the community note. And they got to a point where like, this is the only option we have. I was like, if the only option you have is lying, like, then do you maybe not think you might be in the wrong? Like, maybe just a little bit. But yeah, like the whole narrative of how things were perceived, and to some extent, I think also a lot of like the pro players were potentially a little bit in the wrong as well, because they were potentially also amplifying false information. I don't know, and I'm not going to say anyone did or didn't, because like again, we don't have the full story. I think still.
Most of them almost certainly never looked into it. They just saw a tweet and they were like, "Oh, everyone's being unfair to these guys. I'm a pro too." Retweet, yeah, of course. I don't most of them even know the case.
Well, one thing that I think is interesting is if the players want a unified voice like that, like you had your opportunity to have one and you fucked it.
Yeah, exactly. There was that thing before you all took the backs.
If you want to have a unified voice where you all stand up for each other, then reform your union and get your shit together.
By the way, if people want to know the punchline about the player union, the person who was the biggest like player advocate of the player union himself hasn't really been very active about it, because he then took probably the biggest, worst contract in the history of professional Counter-Strike. It was Zipnix, if you don't know. And as far as I know, I think to this day, he was like still paid by Astralis like an enormous sum of money
to
not
sounds
play
like a good
for
deal.
Astralis. So the joke is like, it's like he just got his own god tier deal and was like, you know what, actually, I'm kind of chilling on this whole civil
now you
rights
mentioned that,
thing.
I don't think I saw him disclose that conflict of interest this time around. I think that was only for Shanghai. So
really?
Maybe his payments have now ended. Interestingly.
Okay.
But yeah,
fair enough then. It should have been around this time. It was about 5 years.
Yeah, I think it might have ended at the end of 2024.
But yeah, it's right. They definitely did used to have this. Remember when we did Flashpoint, we were like interfacing with them on like what like the monitors should be like or something. Like the idea of this, like we could. You're right. This would have been the obvious body that would deal with an issue like this.
So yeah, that was obviously one issue. And now I do agree with myself. I've forgotten what the second one was. So.
Well, put it this way, I know a bunch of we could circle back to. First of all, on that one, essentially what he's talking about, and this is actually one of the biggest parts of the Crocs, is when you say deadline, you have this question no one asks is, who set the deadline? Like, it wasn't God. It wasn't like, on that day the sun reaches its zenith and therefore it must, someone's obviously set it. So the question becomes, who set it and why? Which is exactly where, by the way, the entire episode could just be about people going down the maze of who did do that and who said that. Because essentially, like, that's why, if you notice, all the references are to, yes, but what about Copenhagen, Nine Pandas and Game Legion? It was a similar scenario, right? Problem there is different tournament organising. Also, by the way, that was the first CS2 major, etc. So the questions become things like, who set the deadline? Is it like a hard deadline? Did you just set it to have an arbitrary rate for simple things? Could be as innocent as I wanted to make my content features, etc. But people are ignoring things. One thing I don't like essentially goes like this. I do think if you're going to be incredibly harsh about a problem, you should have at least like a decent solution yourself. Because if you don't have a solution, how can you really tell the other person, like, well, where's your solution? It's like, you can't come up with one. So one problem I have is like as he's saying, they asked for a few more days, but that sounds like that was just like the thing of like, oh yeah, ready in 5 minutes. So it's just, you're just delaying the person, but you could take 20 minutes, you could take 5 minutes, who knows, right? My problem becomes like, I feel like if there really was an obvious date that's fair, why has no one said the obvious date the deadline should be instead? Instead, they're just using the Nine Pandas thing of like, put it this way, I feel like there's a bad faith argument being made by people over the deadline, where I feel like the position of the people who think the deadline was wrong isn't like it should be a week later or 5 days. I think their position for real is that if, as long as Bestia has a fucking visa and shows up on the day of the game, they should be allowed to play. I feel like that is the insane, like, straw man position that they're just like allowing to exist, but no one's probing. Because that's the question I would have to anyone. Because what date would you put then? Because by the way, then we can have the discussion of like, is that enough time for the stickers? I think, by the way, I actually think the most underrated aspect no one even brings up is, what if I'm the first round opponent? Well, I have to find out the night before I'm playing someone else. I just wasted all my. That's not a minor issue. Remember, also, by the way, in theory, by the way, that's even going to affect the top team. Bestia was one of the lowest seeds. Like, so I think that part about the deadline's massive. But everyone's acting like, as long as you disagree with the first one, we're all on the same team. It's like, what's the solution to this? I actually find this one pretty hard. That's why I say Messioso. Then it gets even worse when you find out people are lying about the dates or do they have the feet. It's like, bloody hell, it's hard enough to ascertain the truth.
So that was one interesting about Copenhagen was in Copenhagen there was a weird situation where the seeds for Gamer Legion and Nine Pandas were exactly the same. Like they were ranked in the VRS, they directly replaced each other. So only the initial match up opponent got changed, which was I think Amcal, I think it was, who ended up I think losing to Gamer Legion. And you can argue that was an integrity issue because Amcal were preparing for Nine Pandas and then within 24 hours had to play
Absolutely,
game.
yeah.
With this one, 3 matches got changed, so 5 other teams were affected, which is significant.
Oh, there you go. You're also
Exactly.
affecting people who aren't even in the match.
So,
yeah, exactly.
If you'll allow me, the word deadline in the Blast Austin Major rulebook appears twice, and in neither time does it relate to visas at all. I'm going to maybe put myself under the bus here. I'm going to read from the TPA, the Tournament Participation Agreement, which is the document that all teams have to sign to participate in the major. We sign them for pretty much every single event. And it does literally on every single page say strictly private and confidential. But I'm going to read it anyway, because I think this is a matter of public interest. And I also think that I also think that Blast and all tournament organizers had to publicly have the same documentation available to all teams, and they had to, the whole point of this open circuit is that everything has to be open, right? So I think this document is essentially should be a matter of public record for all teams, and so I don't have a concern with reading this.
By the way, almost every tournament, in my opinion, should have the rule book put publicly, because of the fact that, like, by the way, it's notorious tournament organisers, if it's not public, will change things retroactively, like update the document, do all sorts of naughty things in these particular cases. The rule book is public,
but the participation agreement is not public. I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be public, because again, like, if all the revenue things have to be public, I think this is fine. So,
and by the way, in this case, if it had helped Blast, it would be a thing they could point to. We say, "No, look at this agreement that we all have, and you all knew about." That would help them.
So there's one line that has deadline, and it does relate to visas, which is quite useful. It's the only deadline in the entire document. So it's under a section called Team Obligations, which says the team hereby warrants and represents that it shall, and then B, responsible for ensuring all information requested regarding necessary visa applications or similar country entrance consent is presented to relevant teams by the requested deadline. So there's the first deadline. Any deadlines not met or requested information that is missing may result in the team being unable to continue in the tournament. In this instance of the occurrence, Blast shall not be liable for any discontinued teams. Blast shall not be liable if the team does not meet the required applications or similar country entrance rules and is therefore denied a visa or entrance to the country. So the only 2 words that say the word deadline do not relate to when they can set a deadline or when the deadline is, which is a concern, because again, it does mean that Blast can set the deadline anytime. And it does say by the requested deadline. So logically, if you sign this document and then Blast set a deadline, that is the deadline, which is, I would like to see like a more kind of hard line timing on that. Again, this is where I think that certain TOs do very good rulebooks and very good sort of legal aspects to it. And some are a little more flexible, which can be to their benefit, but can also make situations like this a little more complicated, because it's not like written down. There's no way you can just refer to exactly what happens. But yeah, that is the only reference to the word deadline in this TPA. And then I think going back to your point about both the match schedule and like when did they decide to set the deadline and why. In the rulebook, there's a match schedule part, which just says Blast shall use reasonable endeavors to provide the match schedule to all teams at least 2 weeks prior to the applicable event. And the deadline, that they set, which was the 21st, is technically 13 days prior to the first match. The first match is on the Tuesday.
Okay. So it was already actually
slightly so I think that's the reason why they set 2 weeks, or approximately 2 weeks. It says at least 2 weeks, reasonable endeavors. So, I'd say that they met that obligation, and I think that's why they said it at that point. And
by the way, I want to get your take on something, because an obvious counter people have made, but it's the first thing I thought of too. Because if you notice, I tried to just do like lateral thinking style, like what side angle would attack this, right? The obvious thing to say is this: that I'll phrase it the way Thorin would say it. The biggest problem with this topic is, aside from a tweet that pulls at your heartstrings, I don't give a fuck about Bestia, mate. Like, I'm not going to watch their games. I hope they go 0-3. There's actually one player that's decent. The Thomason guy's not bad, but in general, it's not a top team. It's not one that's going to do anything at the major. It's actually almost. The joke is, of all the teams at the major, it's one of the least relevant ones that would have an impact. I understand for them that's not the case, but I'm not them. I don't wake up and go. So my obvious question becomes this, Messioso. The area where I feel like you can have some ground if you are the people pushing back against this deadline is, I'll give you two obvious extreme examples. Imagine for some bizarre reason, it's Vitality that didn't have their visa on the deadline. Or the other obvious one to me is just Donk himself. If Donk himself, a Russian player of the year, reigning major, if either Vitality the team or Donk the player didn't have their visa, do you imagine there's a world where Blast would have like pushed the deadline a day or two, or they'll back channel themselves? I'm no comment on that as fuck question, but no. Oh, fair enough then. I guess you can't really. But basically, I'll just say from my part, I just imagine they would probably try and find a way. This is an example where, unfortunately, because I agree with what you said at the end there, mate. In theory, it should apply to everyone. Whatever the rules are, should just be uniform, and you should almost not look at the players. You should actually treat it as, well, in this box, it could be Donk, it could be a Bestia player. I just have to give the deadline. But unfortunately, essentially, I get actually why you can't answer that. To be fair, you competed in the tournament, but I would just say it would beggar my belief to imagine that if there was any wiggle room, Blast wouldn't apply it. Now, by the way, that's not actually to say that we live in a perfect utopia where you can apply all teams' depth. Like, it would literally affect your major if you didn't have Vitality. It would affect your major if you didn't have Donk. Like that. Unfortunately, those people are on some level more important. So I think that, like, thinking about that food for thought is what I think makes people a bit uncomfortable with the idea. Like, was it a hard deadline? Does it have to be that hard? Can you move it, etc.?
Well, here's my thing, because I can jump in here. Baby Richard Lewis conspiracy theories, which sometimes are true. I was going to say the most obvious thing here, after all these years of having visa problems, having players struggle to get visas for tournaments, we saw it with Manassi, with Blast, we obviously saw it with the Copenhagen Major. The obvious solution is set the hard deadline at the start when that player agreement goes out. But then Donk could miss your tournament. Then Vitality could miss your tournament. And we all know that the big names bring views. That makes you money. So you don't want to set the hard deadline at the start, because then you risk losing a big name, right? And that's where the issue is. Messioso can't answer it. But 100%, if this had been Donk, that deadline would have never been made public. I don't think they would have set a deadline. I think that they would have probably gone, I honestly believe any TO would have gone, oh, we'll give him some more time. We'll give him some more time. We'll have the other team on standby. So, like, I do think that that's the situation, because the easy solution to all of this is the moment you announce your tournament, you have the hard and fast deadline of when visas need to be in. Simple. We all knew that the States was quote unquote problematic, which funny enough now hasn't been. I mean, it's been one team and everyone else. And the team got their visas in the end. So other than Holzer, which is a different situation, everyone's playing. So it hasn't actually been as problematic as everyone thought. But a hard deadline probably was the solution that would never work if you wanted to guarantee you got the big names into full views.
By the way, shout out to the whole scene for actually, unironically, even though you're all Zoomers, becoming like the boomers of 15 years ago who were like, thanks, Obama, but you're doing it unironically just like they were. Like, your whole take for real is like, that bloody Trump stopping everyone getting visas. Like, you are aware, as she just described, like, there were events in fucking Copenhagen, like an equal amount of people didn't get visas.
Being one of them.
For fuck's sake, guys, like... Exactly. That's like that whole story.
We also had
way overblown, and also spoiler that fucking South
America.
Also had
like, what Hunter was in Kazakhstan. there was a bunch of
Kazakhstan was crazy.
Yeah, like there's been a bunch of events over time that have had visa issues. Like we almost had one for Melbourne. Due to a fuck up, but we almost had one for Melbourne. Like, and every single player's been to Melbourne.
Oh, by the way, that reminds me. And another topic we should bring up is this. I'll tell you something else that are from the outside without knowing like the particulars of their fucking company, Messioso. One thing that I think plays very poorly is the idea that Bestia, a company from Argentina, can't get their visas. Whereas, like, one detail a lot of fans might not be aware of, but you've maybe heard about from Russian players, is another problem about getting visas when you're someone who needs more than like a week, basically. Not that the guy gets the instant visa. Is if you attend events, you can't do it while you're at the event because you're using the passport. So the real question becomes, Bestia, you don't go to events. So how are you not getting your visa? But literal Russians who are doing stuff like going to an event and timing it, like, can I get back on this day? And then instantly send my passport off, and then that might make me like slightly late to the next event. They're doing like crazy juggling of plates trying to go to all these events, and they got all their visas. Like, and obviously, again, Messioso, you can't speak to their case, but is that something like that was a red flag for you when you heard this? Because as far as I know, I think they've been to one event
in the last like 5 months, and it was an event in Buenos Aires. It was the Fire League finals. So in where I assume the embassy for the United States is.
Because I imagine for you, your team must be tricky. You've got like South Africans that have to like go back sometimes, and you have to figure out the event.
We've had some issues. Like, we've had to like say, oh, okay, we're just not going to go to this event because we need to get our visas sorted, and everyone just flies home, gets their visas done, and then like we had the same thing for like China last year where we had to like decline, I think like an online event in Europe which we could have gone to just to get all the visas done, and yeah, like we do have to plan a little bit around it, and like for example, we missed IEM Chengdu last year because
the one after the major,
Chengdu. Oh, it was right after. Yes, that's exactly it.
Yeah,
that's exactly it. Because we arrived in Europe in like the 4th of January, and we didn't leave until like middle of March or something, because we played like 2 weeks of Blast, Katowice into something else, and we just never had a time to actually go back and have like a full week and a half to like send off our visas to the Chinese embassy and get the visas done. And then BSL basically said like, hey, like we have to set a deadline, and I was like, yeah, okay, like we want to come, but like we can't actually apply for these visas right now, because after Katowice we had to go to Mexico for the RMR, then we had to fly straight from the RMR to the UK to play the Blast Showdown, and then we had to stay from the Showdown to the Major because it was only like 8 days or something, so we weren't going to fly back and then we were like, if we don't have our parcels back before the Major, we're obviously not going to the Major, which would be stupid. So like there was just this constant time where we had like 3 or 4 or 5 days maximum at home, not enough to do a visa, and we had to travel because like it was like the RMR and then the Major. So then by the time we were basically into a point where we had to say like, hey, if we get knocked out in the first stage of the Major, we can maybe get back and get our visas in time, but if we make playoffs, we can't, like 100%. And ESL just said, hey, we're setting a deadline. If you haven't got the visas, we haven't got the visas. And I said, yeah, sure, like that's fine. And we just accepted they were going to remove us at that point. Which, yeah, it was tough, and we physically we would have had to give up events to do that, and the events we would have had to give up would have been like Katowice, the RMR, or the Major, which was obviously non-negotiable for us. So we were never going to do that.
Yeah, of course.
I suppose technically we could have given up the Blast Showdown, but contractually we couldn't give up the Blast Showdown. So yeah, we could.
I think the biggest thing you're illustrating here, though, is look how many months ahead of it he was. Like, he was, we're talking about, like, that must have been like 4 months ahead or something, yeah, but you're not looking like a week, oh, shit, we're out of time. Like, you've got to really plan for this stuff. Because, again, if you don't go to the events, I'm going to imagine you're not as, this isn't to see incompetent, but you're not as competent or versed in doing this. Like, I imagine this team was
we were already in Europe before we got the invite to China. So, like, we just had no chance. And, it may have worked out, but it just didn't work out. Initially, we hoped that we could apply either in Poland or Copenhagen, but both embassies basically said, like, no, you have to apply in your residency. And actually, Holzer did get his Chinese visa because he was actually in Norway. So he actually did do his visa in the gap we had. So he was actually the only person who did have a Chinese visa for Chengdu. Everyone else, because they were traveling all the time, they weren't back in the US, they couldn't get their visas. So yeah, we've had that issue before. And I know other teams have also had that issue where they've either had to give up events or just haven't been able to get the visas because they've been traveling to events.
Put it this way, I'll just reference it because it's the most like complained about thing that everyone gets wrong in the fucking industry. Supposedly last year, that's the real reason why Spirit didn't attend that first like Pro League, is that they only got given that Cloud9 spot like 2 weeks before. But everyone always says they turned down the event, and it's like, no, as far as I know, they actually couldn't get the visas for it. So like, no, there's plenty of times this has happened. There's certain teams like Spirit that they just have more limited like bandwidth as to what events they can attend. They can't just go to every single one because it's obviously harder to get the Russian visas. You have to go all the way back home again.
Schengen days as well.
And also, by the way, you notice, there's another thing. You can only spend so many days in Europe, so you can't just like waste it all on every event. Yeah, no, this is why this whole thing is trickier. But the other thing to throw in there is this. Right, it's one thing if you lie behind the scenes. As Messioso says, maybe the tour organizer didn't have a date written down, but then they say this is the date, but then no one asks them the special question, was that date ever written down and agreed upon? You can do it where you've got like a bit of grey wiggle room. The problem is, as far as I'm aware, I don't have the information right in front of me now. I'm not investigating the case. But as far as I know, just from what I remember seeing on social media, it appears Bestia also just outright blatantly lied about whether they had the visas or not. Like, it seems like at one point when they saw it was going against themselves, they essentially communicated the gist of like, we've got them now. And then when they showed them, they actually put like a thing, but some of them weren't even the date they said. Like, as in, some of them even showed on the date that it was issued, it was after the deadline. So as far as I can tell, it's possible they might even have just openly lied about like the facts. It's why Richard said that fucking tweet that was a banger where he said this case went from, something like, that sucks, to like, what the fuck or something. Like, it did. It just went from like, it pulled on your heartstrings. Like, that's actually
I am wondering to some extent.
Hashtag I stand with Blast. That was Richard's second tweet.
Yeah, that was it. By the way, and if If Richard says he stands with the TO, doesn't even work with him. Exactly. What do you need to know at that point?
I do think I just want to tie this back though, because obviously when this whole thing, when the deadline happened and Bestia comes out and says Blast has set a deadline, we've got our visas and we can't play, everyone is up in arms, and then Blast has to finally respond with a very long statement.
That was effective. That was a good approach.
In their statement, they said that, and they brought this up, and at the time I still was like, why are you bringing that up? But it kind of makes sense now, where they mentioned Bestia had employed legal help or assistance with the visas, and the assistance they'd got was incorrect, which had further delayed the situation.
Right.
So there was like a whole situation where the team itself had possibly been at fault to create such a long delay. I'm not 100% sure, but it felt like that was what Blast was trying to say, like, hey, we gave them a lot of support, but they followed the incorrect procedure.
Yeah, I think there's more to that story, because
as well?
the specific two players, which was Tomazin and Luchov, I think it was, right? Both of them have been trying to get US visas for years. Like they were meant to attend an event we attended at the end of 2023, which was ESL Challenger Atlanta, and they ended up playing with two subs at that event because those two players couldn't get their visas. I'm pretty sure it was those two. Let me just double check. Yeah, it was.
Is it implied that they just have some like unusual problem that's built up? Because obviously, when you get these visa issues, they can. Like, if you did it wrong one time, you can get like harder
if you
times
get
next time.
For a visa,
like, that, right?
like it's a pretty significant problem. Like being.
Yeah. The US is famous for banning.
We had that same issue with, with Melbourne, actually. Like we got something wrong on a visa application, and ESL and the government of Victoria was extremely helpful in getting this resolved. But they basically told us, like, hey, you need to withdraw that application, because if we reject it, it's going to affect anything else in the future. And like that was really useful information. We withdrew it, we fixed it, we got the right visa done. It was all good. Right. So, like, having a rejected visa, when it goes on your record that you have to say, like, yes, I've been rejected before, like, it's a pretty significant problem, and it will count against you. So, like, if they've been building up like continual rejections over years and years and years, when they then finally like get into the right place, they've already got that kind of black check mark next to their name. So,
yes,
exactly, yeah. So I think they were up against it from the beginning. I don't necessarily think that they. Right. I mean, they may have started off this time around with the wrong information. Like, I don't know. I can't speak to that, but I imagine at some point in the last 2 years or whatever it is, they've probably applied for them, maybe without like the necessary quality or the documentation or whatever they needed, and then they've just built up this kind of wave of rejections that just hasn't helped them now when they finally sort of got the help they needed, which obviously doesn't help the situation and probably delayed it further. I don't necessarily think that's a black, it's not necessarily that they've done something wrong. Yeah.
In theory, it's no one's fault now. The problem is we can't go back in time, can we? And as you're saying, it's even actually a problem that you can imagine could easily happen, because in this case, I've no doubt when they originally started these problems, probably wasn't even in this team. You might have been in some even more small org, or you might have been in some scenario where you did it yourself, so it's easy to fuck up, unfortunately,
I can also say, because I, many years ago, like, managed a South African Overwatch team that made the Overwatch World Cup, blah, blah, blah. We had a player that got his US visa denied. And the one thing is, we got absolutely no reasoning as to why. They just sent a letter. They say it's been rejected. And then you start going through paperwork and you're double checking everything. And then someone's forgotten one document when they submitted it. And forgetting that one thing, they're not going to phone you up and ask you for it. They're just going to reject it. But then once it says rejected, the next time you apply 3 years later, the first thing that comes up
is, were you ever rejected?
Said, yes. And so now straight away there's a big red flag. So even if it is like an administration issue,
it doesn't have to be your fault at all. Problem. The joke is, I've had that happen many times where, because I got like rejected for the first time for like an E-League visa, it meant every other time after that for like a bunch of years, I had to keep saying like I was rejected, and it would be like for what reason and what case. And the joke is like, obviously they quickly look it up and it's no big deal. Like you'll say, it's not actually a major issue, but it means that you have to tell them. And by the way, if you don't tell them, that's considered lying. So then you can get in trouble. The joke is like, if people want to know how hard it can be for America as well, there is almost like a randomized element, because they did add that famous thing where, this might sound mad, Sam, but this is actually real. As a way to reduce the amount of people who get the visas and lower the immigration, they essentially just put almost like a randomized element of like, just ask a bunch of people for extra evidence just to like delay the process. And just by delaying it, you get less people get the visa, right? So I had that happen to me. And mine, I think, is the funniest case ever, because it's one of those examples of where this is good for this example. Because as a human, you'd solve this in 5 minutes. But if you're doing a bureaucracy, it has to follow all the rules and go between the departments. So all you need to know is this. Before I was getting my visa, visa, I was the letter of like recommendation and confirmation that DDK is who he says he is in esports, because I'm the esports historian, right? And I have 20 years in esports. So my letter got Dan his visa, and then afterwards they declined my visa and said, who are you? And is this actually who you are? And it's like, again, to a human, that makes your brain explode. If you know how offices work, that makes perfect sense.
I've written a lot of those recommendation letters as well for teams, and I've never had to apply for a US visa, thankfully. But I can just see that happening, and the irony being just so stupid.
Oh, it's amazing, I know. Because Dan even got his, and I was like, how does it make sense?
They'll rely on your recommendation, but they don't trust you to actually come yourself. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
I know, exactly.
So I suppose to bring it back to the Bestia conversation, Messioso, the truth is we don't actually know, because there's been all these different, you've obviously got Blast saying one thing and it's very PR and protected, and then you've got Bestia coming out saying lots of things, and then occasionally you see pictures and all of the internet weigh in, because that was another thing I saw where someone was like, oh, they can't even travel on the visas, sorry, they can't compete on the travel on the visas that they got. Like, there was so much.
Oh, right.
Going on.
With these tourist visas,
so they've got business visas. Which, for example, like the example the UK government gives is like if you're a football team traveling to tour America, like if you're Liverpool and you're traveling to play like a pre-season tour, then you can travel on B1 visas. The UK government specifically says that, as long as you're competing for foreign salary, essentially, like the money's not going in or out of the US, then they seem to say that's okay.
Right. Oh yeah, essentially it's like soft as, or you're not working because you're not being paid by an American.
But if you're like the average person who goes to the US and says, "Hey, I'm here to work," you'll get rejected immediately. So it's definitely like a little bit of a gray area, and there's not full documentation. But my understanding, at least, is that these teams and like the Brazilians have been doing it for years on B1 visas as well. So I think the B1 visas are fine. So I don't think that's an issue.
Okay.
In our example, like with Holzerk, he has to have a P1 visa because he's employed or he's working for a US company. Like he needs to have a P1 visa. That's why our situation is more complicated, and there's issues with that as well. But we're not getting into that. That's a different topic. But that's what separates like Holzerk's situation from these guys. And I do think they have the right visas. I think the B1 visas are fine. So I think they're going to be good with those. Oh well, they're not going to be good if maybe they still travel. I don't know. They have the visas now. They can. But yeah, I think the B1 visas are fine.
I'm sure they'd love to come watch the major.
Imagine.
Here's the thing. If you actually do have the visa and you really believe you're in the wrong, I'm not giving this advice. This is just theoretical. But you could theoretically just go to the major with picket signs like, we'll play CS for a spot. We're here fast. You can't ignore us. We have the visa. Yeah, I mean, you can make a whole political
they know the hotels. Like they actually could just turn up and just...
You could just wait in the crowd near the barriers, like, Robs, it's me. Hey, Robs, it's us. And then hey, can you let that guy in? Oh, sorry, never mind, I'm just going to go play my game. You could do that. You could make a whole scene out of it, you know.
I mean, I don't think they will travel, but they technically could.
No, I wouldn't bother. Yeah. It's over at this point in time. Come on.
I mean, through this whole thing, okay, so you say it's over, but this is what I do find quite curious, because I believe it's the owner of Bestia has come out and said he's taking legal action. And...
By the way, that's another part we have to bring up about this is like either there is something going on, or they've also gone to like theatre levels where like what was that picture where it looked like they were signing like a peace accord or something? Like, thank you, like some politician in front of like, what's going on, mate? Like, is that just a fucking PR op? What's going on? You know?
Well, he said, he made that comment, and then again, I have lived this entire thing on the internet, so probably 90% of the information I have on this is completely untrue, but God, I'm enjoying the story. Was someone then
perfect for a podcast thing? Spit, keep telling us.
So I said, oh, the owner's going to sue. And then someone said that the owner is some sort of like super successful poker player who's made millions and actually has the money to legally take on Blast, which excited me to no extent.
Because I was like, legally take on Blast at all. I'm suing you for not letting me play in the tournament.
And then, but that was the thing. Then I was like, well, if they haven't said, I mean, this is where I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know. And also, I don't know, it would either be in Copenhagen or the UK. I'm presuming whatever agreement you sign with
where
Blast,
they would sue them, right.
Where they would sue them is that because obviously different countries, different legal precedents of like, is there a legal precedent because there was no deadline in the original agreement?
True.
Does that all come into place? There is that very specific segment Messioso read.
Yes.
Like now it gets super complicated and insane and all of that. But can they even sue? Is that
No, by the way,
even
that's a
worth
very
it?
valid question in itself, because you know another thing that is probably the biggest nightmare fuel about any fucking Reddit or social media thread about the law is it's just 99% idiots who know nothing and saw movies going, definitely go through if you went to court. Like, and then you just go, mate, it's not as simple as that. Like, by the way, I can tell you with Flashpoint, we had exactly this experience. Let's just say a guy, his name rhymes with lie home, from Astralis was being a bit of a prick, and I told them, "You are aware if what you say is true, we should probably be able to sue him." And then someone had to come to me. This is brilliant, Messioso, when you just joined the company, and then they go, sorry, Thorin, we looked into it. It turns out we'd have to sue him in Denmark, and when I looked it up, everything they've done's fine there." So I'd have maybe looked that up before we, went into negotiation. Brilliant. You're just Americans who, as usual, weren't aware that you wouldn't be doing the case in America. Okay, that's great. So it is way more complicated, and like most legal matters, there's a reason we hire incredibly intelligent but morally questionable people to argue these cases. Like, you can always find some wiggle room. So if there actually is a case that someone will accept, maybe there's like actually an angle they can win. Who the fuck knows, right? It's not impossible.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to get into the legal aspect of it because I couldn't tell you, but yeah.
Some of our pay grade, none of us know that shit.
But
guys.
also, does it? But my thing is, what does my question is always, what does it solve? So cool. You're going to seek legal action. You're going to take them to court. One thing that is my understanding international is all courts are really slow to get shit done. So by the time this is actually gone to, if it does even go to court, because there's going to be mediation first and backwards and forwards and blah blah blah, whatever. Then it goes to court. It's already past the major
damages, I guess.
I mean,
money.
I suppose damages. So cool. So you get some money. Like, what was the whole point that we all got attached is because we wanted to see them play.
Yeah.
Because everyone wants to see them play. So once the money changes hands to the super wealthy poker player, suddenly I'm not as invested.
Well, I'd like to hope that he would pay the players the money that they would have gotten. Like logically, the damage would be equal to what a team would have earned from attending. So it is esports.
So the likelihood is he won't pay the players.
Oh, by the way, we didn't even throw this in there, but to be fair, there is also another motivating factor, which is that if you are a Bestia player, aka, there's a reason we keep saying Bestia. I don't even know if we could all right now go to our head name all 5 players. I don't even know if Messioso would get all 5. Like, I think he might get 4. So all I'll say is this. It would be for them. The sticker money alone is probably life-changing. Like, that's another incredibly motivating factor. This is essentially the biggest score they're going to get maybe for years. So that's not a minor issue, is it? I get it, yeah.
I mean, let me turn this on our head, because we can go backwards and forwards on this and do the he said and they said. And how should this have been handled?
Fucking hell.
Because I feel like it was a mess from start. How do you handle a situation?
Well, here's the dreaded thing. You notice no one's done this so far. I think maybe Valve should be involved. Can you admit? Because one thing I am sick and tired of is Valve simultaneously, like on some quantum super state, being the one that decides everything and tells the TO what to do, but then never ever being present to like respond to things, put their name on it, join. Like in this particular scenario, it is your tournament at the end of the day. Like on some level, I would figure you'd have like at least put it this way, at least an opinion about what you want the deadlines to be. Like, by the way, couldn't Valve instantly answer with a liaison questions like, is it about the stickers? Is that a really important thing? But maybe, by the way, for all we know, maybe they know metrics we don't, like that if you replace someone in the sticker and you delay it, that cuts down the total amount of sticker money made by 15% because of the amount of days. There could be like a whole equation we don't know about, but the problem is we as usual, they are just a distant god that we have no idea what they think or even want in the world, and we're just trying to intuit their fucking motivations. So I feel like Valve could also
I think from the data that I have, generally the longer stickers are on sale, the more money everybody makes. So releasing them, they released them like 4 days or 3 days into the Copenhagen Major.
Because, by the way, the reason I bring that up is, as much as I feel bad for Bestia not getting them, what if this now means the other teams that just got in don't get as much money themselves because we're fucking around with the stickers or replacing someone or changing match? Who knows?
We definitely lost out on money in Copenhagen because the sales went out so late. I 100%.
That's a big deal then.
That's the case.
Yeah. Remember, orgs are gambling their whole future on these majors and the amount of money you're going to make from that sticker revenue. So it's not a minor issue, And
also the speed at which the stickers went out and everything was announced makes me believe Valve was very much, I would actually say, involved. I mean, I'd put my head on a chopping block. I think Blast is getting a lot of hate. I think Valve probably set the deadline and said, hey, this is the deadline because we need to get this stuff released. Like, we're not
But it's
waiting
at a
any
minimum,
longer.
as an outsider, surely Messioso, there's no way Blast's allowed to announce the replacement without Valve signing off.
Blast
Do you
did
know what I
say,
mean?
Blast
Surely
did
they
say
have
that
to have
Valve had
agreed.
signed off on it. And I think it's probably a joint decision where they both went like, this is beneficial to both of us, and they went like, yeah, we agree, let's do it on this day. Like, I don't think there's any. I'm sure Valve have fully looked over this and gone like, yeah, we agree, like this is reasonable. You know, I think the biggest issue. So like, I just want to like say like, Blast did a lot of work in the previous months to like get teams visas. Like, the earliest email I have about the Blast Austin Major visas was from January. Like, they were reaching out.
Fair
like,
enough.
I don't know if this is because we were partner teams or because we were highly ranked or whatever it was, but like, they were reaching out to a lot of teams as early as January. And I know that like, when they did like the February update went through, and like when they began to like map out like who were the reasonable teams who could like start attending this event, they started reaching out to them and saying like, hey, we want to help you guys get your visas, everything else. Like, we said like, hey, we're going to be completely fine except for Holzerk. You know, can you help us with that? And they looked into that as well. Like, could they talk to anyone, you know, within Texas government, Austin mayor, whatever it was, like try and help us like push through what we need to get done, because we're essentially just waiting in a queue right now. Like, that's the only thing that we're doing for Holzerk's visa, is just waiting in a queue. And as soon as we get to the front of the queue, like, I have no doubt they'll just go stamp, cool, all done, go get your passport, you're ready to go. So, you know, we asked if there's anything they could do with that, but they said no, that's, you know, that's without outside of our capabilities. But if you have any visas that you need applied for, like, we can provide all the information. So like, I'm sure that all the teams were pretty upfront and got things done quite quickly. Like, I know that teams qualified and already had visas from like Ukraine and countries like this. Like, teams were ahead of the game on this. Like, they had these invites, they had the information from Blast to get this shit done. So like, it was definitely possible for all the teams to get their visas done. I think these two players, because of their history with the declines, just maybe needed to get better help earlier in the process. And I think if they had like, for example, a clear deadline set earlier, they may have recognized the seriousness of the situation. Maybe a few weeks earlier, they could have perhaps gotten ahead of it. I think there's a number of failures. One on Bestia's side for maybe not getting ahead of this as early as they could have done. But I think the other side is Blast's communication could have and should have been a lot earlier and quicker around the deadlines. I think the late setting of the deadline is the biggest contentious issue of this, because that essentially sort of cut Bestia's legs out from underneath them when they weren't really in a position to speed up any processes at that point.
I mean, put it this way, obviously, logically, if you don't know the specific date, you might think you have an extra week still, or a few extra days.
Yeah.
That's
so
fair.
I think there's failures on both sides, but I don't think the outcome is unfair to anyone. I think it seems unfair, but I don't think it truly is unfair, because the longer you delay it, as you say earlier, like, the longer you delay it, the longer these teams don't know who their opponents are, the seedings are going to change, like, it then begins to impact the integrity of the rest of the event. Yeah,
you can't make content.
Exactly.
You know,
so I think
things,
the deadline set was fair. I think the issue was the communication of the deadline was questionable. But like, again, you know, I think Blast were trying to give them as much time as they felt like they could give them. But if in their mind they knew they had like a sort of a date in mind, they should have communicated that earlier. So again, I don't know what caused that.
Oh, and by the way, since he said this earlier, it's also worth pointing out that saying the Nine Panda situation isn't a great reference, because that was actually a far from optimal way to solve that problem, and maybe shouldn't even have done that. Was in fact maybe the boat being pushed out a bit too far. I'm with you on that one. I even think that one seemed a bit, because everyone keeps referencing that, like, we can do that every time. That sounds like a terrible way to do business. By the way, one last thing I'll even throw out there that people don't consider, which is crazy, is this. This is why you can't really, in my opinion, allow that fake straw man opinion of like, as long as you show up on the day, just let them in, they've got the visa. Can you even imagine if I was a tournament organizer, bro, and actually I didn't have one of the teams when my tournament began? Remember, you can't just go let in Billy Nomits from all the local area. Like, it's the fucking World Championship of Counter-Strike. Like, the idea that, like, again, also, by the way, what happens to the replacement team? What, do they just wait by the phone until they're told, like, 2 days before, like, you can come in now? Like, that's absurd. Like, this is why when there's so many moving parts in a scenario like this, you can't just listen to one incredibly motivated emotional appeal. Like, you have to consider everyone involved. Like, what about the other teams, the team that plays them, the replacement team, the fucking tournament organizer doing the actual content, the stickers? There's so many other people affected by this ripple effect. Like, it's not as simple as like, just if you can get there, then you can play. Like, that's some shit from 10 years ago in esports, guys. We can't have the major work that way.
Yeah, I mean, like the worst example I can give, I can't remember. I'm just actually trying to refresh my mind of what happened. Was Boston when Immortals got removed because they kicked KNG like a week before the event or something, right? And like
Right.
everything got like shifted after that. But like for me, it looks like they just okay. So because they finished second at the Krakow Major, they were in the playoffs already. So what they did was they just promoted an extra team from the original stage, and they didn't move anyone up. So they played the original stage with 16 teams, and then they just promoted 9 teams. That's how they solved that, because you can't play a Swiss with 15 teams. So if it's the first stage of the major that they're replacing a team in, they have to replace them.
And by the way, to give buys to teams would be absolutely beyond the pale.
In Swiss,
that would be ridiculous.
100%,
Like, you
$100%.
can't run a tournament.
So
that would be absurd.
So what they did was if it had been in the first stage of the major, they would have had to replace them. And I think it's worth mentioning, like, Bestia with Legacy was actually really simple, because we knew Legacy had visas. They were in Dallas the week before, right? So we knew that Legacy were able to replace them. That would have been fine. But let's say the Asian team, I don't know if it was this team, but I have a guess. It was probably Chinggis Warriors. That would be my guess.
Makes sense.
Let's flip the script onto that region. Like, if you're the team qualifying from the Mongolian and West Asian qualifier, and Chinggis Warriors don't have their visas, you are not going to get visas within 2 weeks. Like, there's absolutely no fucking chance you are getting visas for 2 weeks for Eruption, who are 5 Mongolians, the Huns, who are 5 Mongolians, and 4 Indians and a Pakistani from God's Reign, who already gone their separate ways. Like, there was no way they were going to replace that team from within their regional qualifier. So then what happens to the slot? Like, the slot would have had to go, to another Asian qualifier? So would it then go to the Chinese qualifier? Would it go to the Oceanic qualifier? Like, and then...
By the way, the point he's making here as well is this. We're not literally just trying to find 5 warm bodies to put in seats. We're trying to also qualify the next person in the system. That's all part of the system.
So, like, the next logical team would have been Semperfi Esports. Like, if you can't get a Mongolian West Asian team, which I think would have been very hard, it would have gone to an Australian team, which was Semperfi. Well, they've got 2 Latvians and 3 Australians. Like, I don't know if they're going to get visas in time. So, like, this whole concept of, like, setting the deadline even later, just to me makes no sense. Like, I think the 2 weeks deadline makes a lot of sense, and I think that I mean, I don't know if Blast had already figured out who would replace that Asian team, if it was that Asian team, but, like, in Asia, the situation is way more complex than replacing the South American team with conveniently the one Brazilian team that has been living in the US for the last 5 months. Like, that was like a very convenient situation, a very easy replacement. So yes, they could have said, hey, we can give you an extra week because we know the replacement can come, but then setting a different deadline to the Asian team. So
here's one for you. I'll be fair, like I was with. I think Blast would have extended it if it was Vitality. I'll also go the other way. The same fans that all their heartstrings got pulled on, they did the retweet because they were, please help, the sky's falling. Right? If I'd also told you, the replacement team, that would actually be a team that could win the major and has one of your favourite players in. Don't you think he should have a chance to play? Wouldn't you all then retweet that fucking tweet, even though it goes counter to this exact story? You'd have to have the deadline for him to get in the country. Like, this is why, guys, you can't make rules-based decisions based on do you like the person. Like, it has to be actually whether it's the right fucking rule.
You could have re-added Game Legion or Astralis, who were probably the two. They were probably.
That would be very popular. Don't you think everyone would love to see Asher a major and stuff?
Well, but from a competitive perspective, adding a way better team into the mix, right? So, like, it's not
absolutely
relevant.
No.
I do believe Astralis was actually in the wings waiting. That was why Hooksy was there. The contract was set up very well so that Hooksy would be available should they need to go to the major, and then obviously it didn't happen. But I'm 80% sure that they were waiting in the hope that there would be, because there were rumors that one of the Russian teams would be able to make it and they would be next in line.
Now I'm sad because I want to see what would have happened. Who would have won? Would the cultural impact of Bestia's plea for clemency have won, or would the Hooksy Giga Chad meme, which is now coming back into vogue, but going to the moon, that stock, would that have won? I want to know which would. By the way, I actually feel like for real, the Hooksy one might have won it. It might have made this story go away because everyone wants to see the guy play.
Well, that's the problem, right?
No one knows you, Bestia. I'm sorry. No one knows you, mate.
The Bestia story, because I mean, I wanted that. When they came out and said they had their visas, I still tweeted and was like, just let them play. It's 24 hours after the deadline. Because there is a part where you understand that for these players, this will be life-changing money.
Yeah.
It will be the only time they get to make that sort of money playing CS. Like, I get it. Like, and I do understand why a lot of the top pros got behind it as well, because we can all understand why it's important and why for them it would be important. But there is, like you said, the stakes were low because no one expects Bestia to win the major.
Oh, no.
So it's easy to be like, just give them the shot.
Yeah.
Would it have been different if the competition suddenly changes its face completely?
Well, here's the obvious one, Sam. I waited until now to give you the last food
Right
for
at the
thought
end.
that'll
Of
blow your
course
whole
you
mind.
did. Of
What
course
if
you
it was
did.
the dreaded Falcons that would get the spot last minute? Oh, we all hate them, don't we? The evil oil money of the Falcons. What if they were the team getting the spot, guys? Ooh, maybe. Oh, the rules. They think they're bigger than the rules. Hey, the Falcons are contacting the Saudi government. They think they're bigger than the rules. People would lose their mind if the exact same thing was done, but it was just the Falcons, because they're disliked as an org, Sam. It's obvious reason why. And the difference is, notice how what I showed you there was, even though they'd be doing the same thing, hey, we're contacting government officials, that would be treated as, you think you're bigger than the rules? Like, you should have to follow the rules like everyone, but then we're all saying Bestia can do it. Like, this is why, unfortunately, these topics do become about like emotion and popularity. They're not really about like stickler for the rules. Like, in fact, if anything, people want the rules just changed if they don't like the rules.
Yeah.
I would love the rules to be changed because I don't like it. But the long and short of this is we don't really have a solution. There is no real like right or wrong here. This is just, it's one of those conversations that, I mean, I hate saying this and I do apologize to Bestia. Everyone will forget about when the major starts, Messioso, because I'll have something else
I
to talk about.
think that is a sad situation, because like Bestia did win the qualifier. They do deserve to be at the major.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
I wish they were at the major, because I think they deserve to be there, and it sucks that they are not there because of bureaucratic issues. Like, I empathize with that a ton. Just while I'm on this topic, like what I don't empathize with, and where I lost a lot of my empathy and willingness to care about Bestia's situation, is when they started attacking the legacy org and the legacy players. And essentially I know Dumal went out and did a weird interview where he basically said like, yeah, we would have beat them 9 out of 10 times. Like, but I also respect that.
I
Like,
love
you've got to
I
believe
love
in your
it.
team. Sure, whatever. Like, that's fighting talk. Like, that's a standard interview.
Sure.
But
let me just throw this load of petrol on this.
It was a very poorly timed quote to make, because I know that Legacy knew that they were like waiting in the wings. So like they should have known better than to stoke the fire. But like there was no need for the Bestia org, the Bestia CEO, the Bestia players to like constantly like retweet all the stuff, like, you know, direct abuse towards them, and like they amplified like their fan base to like basically try and force Legacy to like, you know, it's so disgraceful that they didn't give up the slot. It's like, if they didn't give up the slot, Odic would have had it. Like they don't understand.
Yeah, it would go to another team. Exactly. Yes.
They once the deadline hit, they lost the spot. The spot was gone. And Blast said, hey, Legacy, do you want the spot? And Legacy went, yes, we'd love to attend. If they'd said no, they would have called up Odic, and Odic would have said, yes, we'd love to attend. There was no timeline where if every single Brazilian team suddenly says no, it goes back to Bestia. And because
to me, as soon as you make the public announcement from Blast officially that like you've replaced with Legacy, no matter what is a replacement team at that point, like that you've burned the ships, then you can't go back.
Yeah, exactly that. And
come on.
like, it's also really worth mentioning that they initially asked for 5 extra days. So like when Blast made the decision, say, hey, you're out, like they were told, hey, we should have our visas on the Monday, which is like five days away still. Now, they ended up getting them 2 days later. So even though, Sam, I'm going to correct you. You said 24 hours. It was 48 hours. It was their visas.
Okay.
Exactly.
I live in
their visas.
Yeah.
Their visas are dated. But that's exactly what the issue is. Like, is that the amplification of this says like, hey, they were only 24 hours late, and like they were clearly 48 hours late, because their visas say the 23rd on them.
Yes.
And there's no way they got those visas like before the deadline would have passed. So it was like 48 hours later, but they asked for 5 days. And
they don't send
you can't have a deadline.
No, exactly.
You can't have a deadline and then say, oh, but if you get your visas in 5 days, we'll retroactively fix it. Like, they missed the deadline.
Yes.
It sucks.
Yeah, by the way, please, can everyone stop doing the thing that everyone does with VR in football? Like, it's only an inch on his toe. It's like, we either make it so the line is crossed or it isn't. Like, because if you don't know, that argument never ends. It can always be pushed. But it's only a quarter of a centimeter. It's only if it never ends, it'll be a toe and then a foot. So the same thing. If the deadline's the 21st, it can't be. But they're only 6 hours after. That's after the 21st. Like, you can't do it, guys. It doesn't work if you allow any extension. Eventually, it becomes a slippery slope.
I think obviously it's also a little bit unfortunate, perhaps due to the time zones. That obviously like the deadline was set essentially in the middle of the day in Argentina, like early morning. So like they set it at 5 p.m. CEST, which I think it's like 6 hours or 5 hours to Argentina. So like that would have been midday at best. So like most times when you pick up a visa, you pick like like for people who don't know, like typically you drop off visas in the morning and then you pick up visas in the afternoon. And it's usually because they try and separate the traffic going into the embassy, basically. So like in the morning is all the application, is all the appointments for the interviews, and then in the afternoon is usually when everyone comes to pick up their visas. So like, and that's why when Bestia posted that photo of all their visas, it was at like midnight European time, because they clearly hadn't gotten the visas until the afternoon pickup slot as normal.
Right.
So they would have missed the deadline on that day as well, technically. So it was actually more than 48 hours, which is unfortunate.
Right.
I empathize completely with them, because they clearly did. They clearly did try and do everything in the end to get those visas, and they did get them. But yeah, a deadline has to be fixed. And once Legacy had accepted the slot, like there was no way back for Bestia. And like this whole, like their whole campaign of like trying to get Legacy to forfeit their slot or to get Blast to reverse the decision, like at that point, again, it was like a slippery slope to like, this is getting a little bit embarrassing now. And I understand the emotion that they have in trying to get that slot, because I understand that they want to compete at the major. They want to earn the money. Like I completely understand that. But yeah, there was a point where they sort of had to recognize like what's done is done. And like, I think this whole like threatening to sue is pretty damaging to everyone involved, because it doesn't shed a very good light on what we're trying to do. And like, the one thing you don't want to do is get like, they'd have to call like Valve in, right? At some point Valve would have to get involved with that to say like, because they're legitimizing the whole event. And like the one thing we don't need to do is get Valve in a freaking lawsuit, because like they're just gonna go, all right, fuck, this isn't worth our fucking time, fuck you all, no more majors, deal with this yourself. Like, yes. And like, you
no, by the way, that is for real also, even though I'm speculating. That is, if you don't know Valve's approach, it's why I always call them, I don't call them the best parents as a game dev. I say they're the absent parents and we're the latchkey generation. Like, the best thing about Valve, by the way, generally, is that they don't fuck with things. Because when they do, like you're saying, they tend to come in like, right, if you kids don't fucking shut up, right, take all these toys away then. That's their approach. And, so if you piss them off, they're not going to come in and go, it's exactly as you want. They're going to make us all,
if you think that's not true, just look at coaches.
Yes. If you don't know, the best example ever is coaches were trying to demand that they get a PC in the game. So Valve went, right, well, in that case, there is no such thing as coaching. There you go. And you were like, what? Like, that's the overreaction. They went the other way. Yeah, exactly. It's nuts, wasn't it? And then they're like, shit, can we retract that? Too late. It's over now. We kick coach out the game.
Well, there we go. We have no solutions to what happened. We don't know who's right or wrong, but you can tell us.
Just another episode of Feed the Trolls.
Pretty much. Absolutely no conclusion. You can argue it out in the comments, and Messioso will probably get more Argentinian death threats.
Yeah, it's not helpful being British. Like being British and this one topic is like.
Oh, yeah, I hadn't thought that angle too.
The amount of people that just resorted to writing like Islas Malvinas, and I'm just like, bro, like, I really wanted to like just send back like a Falklands meme or something, but like I restrained because I felt like it would have diminished my argument, which was completely solid and factual.
Listen, 10 years ago, I'd have probably done it while attending the major and got fucked up, so it's all good. We've all learned. We've all moved on.
Look at you all growing up. We'll see you soon for another episode.